Sallyface Episode 5 was the final instalment of the episodic Sallyface game, and whilst it may have ended, there are still so many questions unanswered. One in particular that caught my attention were the findings that Todd found in his notes, along with others found throughout the game, which highlight the origins of the Devourers of God, along with the prophecy of Sal, and why he was destined to be the one to bring the cult down. Today we will decode these notes and explore what they mean in relation to the rest of the characters and the timeline of the game itself. Obviously episode 5 spoilers already. If you haven't watched any of the Sallyface game, I don't know why you're watching this video anyway. Starting in the order of when you collect the notes in episode 5, we first read notes written by one of either Ash or Neil in 2003 to 2005, which catch us up to speed on Todd escaping from the hospital after he was infected by the red-eyed demon, as well as how the darkness can consume people naturally, as has been the case with Maple. It also talks about the mysterious mailer who is secretly helping Ash and Neil out from within the cult, and we soon learn that this is Travis, or rather it's largely implied that it's Travis, as he lets Ash escape and helps defeat his father at the end of the episode. And finally, the first note also tells us that the Aslan Temple was destroyed, likely by the cult to avoid suspicion, and the church at the top of the chapel hill is the entry point for the main temple of the Devourers of God. We then read a journal on Maple's corruption from the darkness and how she is changing. I really like this because this mirrors the changes that Evelyn underwent in the videotapes in episode 4. However, we get to see the corruption changes on a more sort of real world level from the outside through the journal and from what Ash and Neil sort of see, compared to seeing Evelyn's mind slowly decay as the tapes go on, which provides us sort of a more understanding on the plague of darkness itself. Now the next notes that you find provide us so many questions for us to go through. Discovered and read by Todd in his research, it's titled The Final Prophecy of Lali Grey, and reads as follows. The blue flame not extinguished still flickers in the night. He that sees between worlds, child of the abomination, wielding light beyond man, pierces through the endless black, betrayer of our kind, resurrected by Astinmar. His sword, blood of man, rises to protect the great atrocity and prevent the triumph of humankind. To break this down, let's do it phrase by phrase to work out exactly what they're talking about, with the caveat that this is a quote, rough and incomplete translation. Blue flame not extinguished still flickers in the night. Now this immediately to me references Sal and his specifically detailed blue hair. It's talking about Sal. Certainly not that rando guy in the cafeteria in episode 3 that some people talk about.
What's up?
We can safely confirm with the numerous times Sal has been told that he is part of a prophecy despite still not believing it until the end. The notes are called the final prophecy of Lali Grey, so the prophecy was created, incantated, made, whatever, by this Lali Grey, and Sal is who they were referring to, whether they knew it or not at the time. Also, just a side note, in Sal's conversation with the vestige of Jim Johnson, Sal remarks and asks why he is the chosen one, to which Jim states it was because he chose to be. Sal wanted to stop the Devourers of God, and in my head it kind of reflects sort of Neo and the Matrix, like the one scenario. Whilst he was destined to do everything that he did, he also did it because he chose to do all those things. It's just a thought that I had. The next part, he that sees between worlds, child of the abomination. The first part, seeing between worlds, Sal gains the ability to travel between multiple realities, as well as the white and the dark room, as we play throughout episode 5. We see this multiple times throughout the episodes that Sal is much more than any normal child with blue hair. Child of the abomination. Straight up, I think he's not referring to Sal's mother, like directly Diane's child is Sal, but it doesn't make any sense that they're referring to Diane. I'm also not saying that Sal was adopted or anything like that, as I don't believe that to be true, as there would have been some sort of indicator that told us that Sal might have been adopted, or that his parents may not have actually been his original parents. But yeah, further notes in the game will help us break this down a bit more. So for now, let's move on to the next bit, which talks about Lali, who is a Native American seer and a previous council member for the Devourers of God. And now Astinmar, or Asinmar, are the 3 pyramids that Ash collects and Sal activates, and are clearly created by Sitlali to achieve the prophecy they created. The next notes you find are from Todd in his and Neil's room upstairs, and talks of the legend of the Greys, which states, "The Grey family is a tribe of Native Americans, but there aren't many historical records of them. Even though there are relatives of the Greys living in Knockville today, their ancestry appears to be more legend than fact. It is said their family was formed when a great owl swooped down from the night sky and made love to a man who was lost in the woods. Weeks later, a beautiful young woman burst out from inside of the man. A nearby pack of wolves came to eat the bits of flesh of the man. By eating this flesh, the wolves became indebted to the young woman. Over time, the pack became human, and together with the young woman formed the first members of the Grey tribe. Descendants of the woman are said to have the ability to see the future. The origin story was likely fabricated and then evolved over time. However, there may be a grain of truth to the proclamation of psychic abilities." So the Grey tribe and Sitlali, who was some leader or prophet of the tribe, were apparently Native Americans who were seemingly formed when a great owl made love to a man in the woods. Now, I took it upon myself to look up the meaning of owls in Native American legend and myth, and the first thing that appears is this, and I found it quite interesting. The meaning of the owl symbol signifies a bad omen. According to Native American legends and myths of some tribes, the owl is a symbol of death. The owl is a creature of the night and was strongly associated with the supernatural. This tells us that this happening love act, whatever you want to call it, is the start of the bad omen that carries on through so many years that leads to the events of Sallyface. It goes on stating that a beautiful young woman burst out from inside of a man, and a nearby pack of wolves ate the bits of flesh of the man and were indebted to the young woman for saving them. Presumably because they were hungry, I'd imagine. Perhaps further legends and myths made this the case. However, let's not forget Todd's notes at the end stating the origin story was likely fabricated and then evolved over time. So going back to the woman bursting out of the man, that may not have been exactly how it happened, but for now let's say it was. We are not supposed to know who this woman is, though it may be fair to think that she is the abomination that the prophecy of Sitlali Grey spoke of. So I'm not sure if the tribe was infighting, as she was a part of the first members of the Grey tribe. So it's a bit confusing, but judging by her birth, it's fair to call that an abomination, I think. At least from this perspective anyway. So the wolves turn into men, and with this young woman form the first members of the Grey tribe, and descendants of the woman are said to have the ability to see the future. Now, we don't know anyone except maybe Jim Johnson who can see the future, but we know of one child that has psychic abilities, and that is what the line is pushing us to. However, there may be a grain of truth to the proclamation of psychic abilities, meaning for me, Sal is a descendant of this woman, and personally I think his mother Diane, not Henry, is where she gets that bloodline from. That's just a personal guess if I had to choose between the two. Let's move on to the slaughtering of children. August 16th, 1984. 255 children and 32 adults were murdered across North America. However, surprisingly, it didn't make many headlines. The story was covered here and there, but not by many major news outlets. It is now my understanding that the cult had something to do with this, and was likely the orchestrator of the whole thing. If true, that could mean their reach extends much further than we expected. A terrifying thought. This, along with seeing what happened on that day in the park to Sal and his mother, tells us that the cult in 1984 attempted to kill Sal and potentially his mother as well, as they knew somehow what children and adults at the time carried the bloodline of that woman of the Grey tribe and knew about the prophecy of Sitlali Grey, what they spoke of, and knowing that child piercing through the endless black, they knew they were the one person that could stop them. Only they should have made sure that Sal was actually dead. The last set of notes are in the Phelps Ministry Temple and are written by the Devourers of God themselves, or so it seems, and I may have a theory about who specifically wrote it, but let's read it through. 1663 to 1681 established. The first prophecy brings a small group of natives together, a faction of the Grey tribe. Colonists arrive in Knockville. A marriage between Sitlali Grey and Wesley Rosenberg unites the two groups, and the original temple is built. Starting at the top, this note tells us that there are a number of prophecies foretold by the Grey tribe, the first being a marriage between Citlali Grey and Wesley Rosenberg. Wesley, an ancestor to Alison Rosenberg, a witch as stated by Jim Johnson in his diary in episode 3, and who we see in multiple episodes, had a large hand in both helping and then trying to destroy the cult when she was younger, as we see in the Gear Boy game in episode 2. This also tells us where she got her witch powers from, likely from the Grey side of her family. Then the original temple is built, and in 1703 the Phelps Ministry is built to hide the temple, used to indoctrinate followers and gain members. Another ceremonial marriage between the Grey and the Phelps families are made with specific details unclear. So Travis's and Kenneth Phelps's ancestors have been involved in the cult since the very beginning. This is where it gets interesting. In the mid-1700s, the prophecy of the child of the abomination Citlali Grey spoke of was first said, and preparations for his execution began. This tells us that Citlali Grey could see the future and thus prophesied the downfall of what later became known as the Devourers of God. And at this point, the light bulb in my head just went off, and I sort of thought of that woman, the abomination, who was born from the man and the owl. Is that woman Citlali Grey? Or is Citlali Grey a descendant of that woman? As we hear nothing else of her in any of the notes regarding this particular woman, so she must have had a name, surely. For me, it makes sense that the woman is Citlali Grey, and she is prophesizing as she can see the future and has psychic abilities. But then she calls herself the abomination, so in her prophecy... So yeah, it is a bit confusing, I must admit. Either way, they are now preparing for what Todd found in his notes, which is the slaughtering of children. In 1887, Addison Apartments is built, and now is where we learn a bit more about how the Endless One fits into this. So in 1905, Terence Addison is born. His parents made a deal with the council, and so the boy was quote-unquote blessed, presumably with some kind of ritual, to be the entry point of the Endless One. Now let's talk about this for a bit. Going back to when we first speak with Alison Rosenberg about the Addisons, and Terence specifically, she tells us that she remembers when they first moved here from overseas and how she sold the land on which the Addison Apartments were built on. I believe at this point, this is where Alison was choosing to be a part of the cult, and her parents and ancestors likely indoctrinated her at an early stage in her life. So maybe it was all she knew at the time. She also tells us that at this point, Terence is the last of his family. The notes also give specifics on this. In 1817 to 1932, Terence's soul is destroyed by the Endless One from the inside, and his parents are murdered by the cult. And due to his appearance changing and potentially arousing suspicion, they lock him in his room on the ground floor of Addison Apartments, never to be seen by anyone until Sal gets in, obviously in episode 4, and we see the Endless One for the first time. With all that said, it's safe to assume that the Endless One is a being of insurmountable power, capable of taking over the world, and I can only think was summoned by the cult through Terence Addison as the host to sacrifice. They fed it human meat made by Mrs. Packerton and fed off its power to continue summoning other things like the red-eyed demons. Let's now move on to the next very important part of this note. In 1906, a new prophecy says that killing the child of the abomination will bring a man from the sky, who they believe is me, in brackets there, who will greatly help the Devourer's efforts. This for me tells us that this whole note is written by Jim Johnson when he was a part of the cult. The prophecy says it will bring a man from the sky, and they are all too aware, as we discovered in Jim's diary in episode 3, that Jim is not from Earth but from another planet, hence a man from the sky. Though the way this is written, it also tells us that Jim is not the person from the sky, and perhaps, now depending on the timeline, this may or may not be accurate, but the cult thought that because they killed Sal in the park that day, that prophecy, that specific prophecy about the man from the sky had come true, and Jim then appeared and joined the cult, when in actual fact Sal was alive, and it was perhaps fortuitous timing that made the cult think that Jim was the man who would greatly help the Devourer's efforts. He came from the sky as he was an alien from another planet, as they had killed the child of the abomination as the prophecy had said. when in reality Jim and Evelyn arrived on Earth because they were trying to escape the Plague of Darkness anyway. So it's very interesting. 1938. This tells us about how the red-eyed demon factors into all of this, and that they are creatures summoned by the cult, which are cosmic predators who are relentless but have a weakness to ultraviolet light. This is shown in the end of the game with Ash's ultraviolet light arm, which you are used to attack the red-eyed demons. The early chapters of the game focused on the red-eyed demon, but they were just a small part in the larger grand scale of the cult's plans. 1983 Initiation. I think this makes perfect sense to think that 1983 was Jim's initiation into the cult. It was a year before the slaughtering of children, and if you look at the final note in the locker, it talks about how they are planning a mass murder of children. This makes me think that 1983 is Jim's initiation into the cult. So we can say pretty confidently that 1983 was when Jim arrived and was initiated into the cult. So there we are. Quite a lot of information to digest, I know, and don't get me wrong, there's definitely still a lot of things. There are still a lot of more questions in that than I think that I tried to answer or tried to work out from this video. What I plan to try and do is maybe do a timeline of the whole Sallyface series, like from every piece of note we've got, try and break down exactly when everything happened, as much as I can do anyway. That will help us maybe understand a bit more, at least about when things happened. So let me know your guys' thoughts. I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions in there, because don't get me wrong, I was thinking about questions and stuff as I was going through this, so don't get me wrong, there is a lot of stuff that's still definitely unanswered, but I hope that trying to break these down at least gives us some kind of at least a bit of better understanding about stuff. And let me know your thoughts if you don't think that Sal is the child of the abomination, or is it if it's someone else or something like that. But you know, for that one in particular, it makes sense. It makes perfect sense that it's Sal. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching another Sallyface theory video. I don't know how many more of the Sallyface theory videos I'm gonna do. I'm definitely gonna look at trying to do this timeline, because I think that'd be really interesting to do. Other than that, I don't know, we'll see. If you guys have any theory ideas, let me know in the comments, and maybe I can do another one of those theories in the comments sort of video, and we can break down what other people are saying, because you guys in the comments are amazing. Those are all the notes from episode 5, and at least give us some kind of an explanation as to just what it all means from start to finish, and it paints us a picture of how the entire Sallyface universe sort of began, seemingly with a bad omen from an owl.